Aeschines paved the way for Athenian democracy. The 10 tribes. Here's the significance of this. As the Greeks had divided themselves up into tribes based on who their ancestors were. Obviously, some tribes became bigger than others. So what Aeschines did, he said, all the old tribal loyalties are done away with, and I'm going to organize every Athenian into 10 tribes based on lottery. In other words, basically pulled names out of a hat, you might say, or spun an 8-ball or whatever he did, but by lottery, he divided every Athenian into 10 tribes and said, this is your tribe, and you will now be divided according to those tribes. He also organized a council of 500, which reminds me somewhat of our Congress, except it wasn't quite the same. The council of 500 became the governing body of Athens for the next several hundred years. Now, it got a bad name because, among other things, it did condemn Socrates to death. It also made a very ill-fated expedition voted to make an ill-fated expedition to Syracuse, which the Athenians lost. But it made Athens one of the more democratic states in the region. Now, the losers of an election were ostracized, and folk, I can understand the reason for that now. I mean, when I was in high school, we'd make fun of people who we thought were different by saying that person's been ostracized, or we're going to ostracize you. But actually, only the very, very high up people were ever ostracized. Now, ostracized meant they were told to leave town for 10 years and not come within about a 40-mile radius of the city and stay gone for 10 years. The only people who were ostracized were the persons who finished number 2 in an election. Most elections are really close. A candidate might win by 51% to 49%. Well, they would tell the candidate who got the 49% of the vote to get out of town, and this meant the candidate who won had some room to act. Otherwise, what was happening before this time, a candidate might get 51% of the vote today and then make one move, and tomorrow have the people turn against him and be turned out of office right away. So the losers were sent out of town for 10 years, and that way the winner had a chance to operate. In other words, if we were still going with that system, Hillary Clinton would be ostracized. Again, to keep her from speaking her mind or from speaking out. In those days, there was no internet, no radio, no television, no newspapers as such. All right. Now, while all this was going on, all of a sudden, something happened to Greece that interrupted their development toward democracy. The Greek colonies in what is today Turkey, it was then called Asia Minor, the Greek colonies were rebelling against the Persians, and a Persian king finally realized, hey, it's the people in Greece who are influencing their cousins to rebel. I think we ought to go and conquer Greece. So 2 kings of Persia sent armies to conquer Greece. The first was King Darius. King Darius believed he'd have an easy time conquering the Greeks. The problem was these Greek men trained for military, not just the Spartans, but all of them, trained from the time they were small. They had trained inside gymnasiums. The word gymnasium is an old Greek term. Well, King Darius went to a place called Marathon, 26 miles from Athens. And to Darius' surprise, Darius was defeated at the Battle of Marathon. Now, the Battle of Marathon is famous because a runner named Thucydides, and no, I'm not going to write his name down, but anyway, Thucydides had run 150 miles throughout Greece to tell the Greeks that Darius had arrived. Now, to show you who was exempt from military service, after running the 150 miles, Thucydides participated in the battle at Marathon to help defeat King Darius. Then when it was over with, Thucydides was asked to run the 26 miles to Athens to tell the people of Athens that they had won the battle. To say the least, Thucydides was actually quite tired. You might think he should have been given a rest. Well, yeah, yes, I must tell you, Thucydides was an Olympic winner. In those days, they had Olympic Games. The Olympic Games were played every 4 years, and they were to honor Zeus. Thucydides had won the last Olympics, particularly because of he was known to be really fast at foot racing. So anyway, he was quite tired. He got to the city square of Athens, and he was able to get the words out, "Victory is ours," and he fell down dead. Today, at the Olympics, they have a marathon. It's 26 miles to remember Thucydides' running, Thucydides' deeds. Nevertheless, the Battle of Marathon destroyed the myth of Persian invincibility. Folk, when you think your army is invincible, you're in trouble. Robert E. Lee felt like his army was invincible during the Civil War, and he went into battle and sent them charging up a hill. It was a bad move. I'm talking about Gettysburg, for those of you who know anything about American history. But anyway, Darius went home in defeat. His son Xerxes came back. Xerxes came back to try to conquer the Greeks. And he decided to fight the Greeks on both the land and on the sea. Now that was a mistake. If you know anything about the land of Greece, Greece has a lot of harbors. It's located on a peninsula. A lot of its people are seagoing. Now Sparta was an exception. Sparta was not on the seacoast, but a lot of the Greek city-states were on the seacoast. The point I'm making is the Greeks were excellent seamen. Much more so than the Persians. Persia did have a seacoast, pretty long one, but their troops were not as good at seagoing as the Greeks. And also the Persian troops were not as disciplined or as well trained or as well equipped as the Greeks either. Well, the Persians attacked. They were better prepared than they had been the last time. They hit the city of Athens, and Athens was sacked. Well, along came the next step to go to Sparta. Sparta and Athens were close to each other, but between Sparta and Athens was a mountain. The mountain had a very narrow pass, the pass of Thermopylae. I'm drawing a diagram here. And now, the Spartan men under King Leonidas only had 300 men, and he lined them up shield to shield, and there was no way to outflank them. I mean, the high steep cliff prevented a pass, but there was a traitor among the Greeks, and this traitor knew a way around to get out of the Spartans' rear. So he led the Spartans, to get the Spartans' rear, but anyway, this traitor led the Persians around the Spartans' rear, and the Spartans were hit from in front and behind. This occurred at Thermopylae. The result was a disaster. Now, several years ago, there was a movie made about the 300 men at Thermopylae. Did any of you happen to see it by any chance? None of you? Okay. It was pretty, I almost bought it one time, but I didn't. Anyway, the 300 Spartans stood and fought to the last man. But see, again, the weakness of this formation they used was if the enemy could get behind you or could get on your flank, they'd whip you. And the 300 Spartans were no match for the Persians. So, second battle, Battle of Thermopylae, also went to Persia. But the next battle was the Battle of Salamis. Thermopylae. Then came the Battle of Salamis. Now, there's a little bit of controversy here. The Battle of Salamis was a sea battle. That pitted the Greek navy against the Persians. There is a story that a Greek scientist stood on the edge of Salamis with a concave mirror in which he shone on the Persian ships and set the Persian ships on fire. And I believe that probably a lot of you, when you were younger, might have played with magnifying glasses and used a magnifying glass to set paper on fire or to set leaves on fire. I don't know if the young boys of your generation do that or not. We did. But anyway, he used the concave. But there's one problem with that. Today, we've tried that same thing, using concave mirrors to try to set a wooden ship and its sails on fire. We've tried with several types of mirrors and several types of ships, and they say we can't do it. Nevertheless, the story goes that the Greek scientists set a bunch of Persian ships on fire. Be that as it may, the Battle of Salamis was a Greek victory. Then they met again on the land, the fourth battle of significance, and the Greeks defeated the Persians on the plain of Plataea. So, King Xerxes went home in defeat, even as his father had done. And the Greeks then prepared for another attack by the Persians. I mean, it's that every generation we have to fight off the Persians. So, Athens formed the Delian League. Not to be outdone, Sparta formed the Peloponnesian League. Now, what actually happened, both of these leagues were formed to ward off a Persian threat. But we're going to find out that they wound up fighting each other. And if Persia would have had enough sense to invade while the two of them were fighting each other, perhaps Persia might have conquered Greece. But that's one of those what might have beens. As it was, now I've already mentioned how that Athens was burned down to the ground and sacked. So Athens had to start over building its city. But then again, Athens got its money from the other members of the league, and using money from the dues that were owed it from the members of the league, they were able to beautify themselves like hardly any other city in history has. It's other cities' expense. They built the Parthenon, they built the Acropolis, they built temples, particularly a temple to Athena. And they built them out of marble, making sure it would be difficult to burn the city to the ground again. Reminds me of something when the city of Atlanta was burned to the ground 150 years ago. The man who did it, General Sherman, said, I know these people that they're going to build a more beautiful city than the one I have burned down. He was right. When Chicago was burned to the ground accidentally, the people of Chicago rebuilt Chicago with skyscrapers that were 10 and 20 stories high, and that were more fireproof also. But anyway, so you have these two leagues, the Delian League led by Athens, the Peloponnesian League led by Sparta. The people who joined these leagues found that once in they could not get out. The other cities, some of them tried to get out, and Athens said, no, you're in to stay. Sparta said, no, you're in to stay. All right. The last of the Greek leaders that I want to mention then after Solon, Pisistratus, Thyestes, was Pericles. Pericles was destined to govern 29 out of 30 years. During one of the elections, he lost, but he was not ostracized for whatever reason. But he won 29 out of 30 elections over the period of the next 30 years. And he's perhaps one of the best, or at least he gets a good name. Unfortunately, though, his side lost. Now, I think I mentioned last time how that, well, okay, no, I didn't. The conflict between Athens and Sparta, when I was a kid, used to remind me of the conflict between the United States and Soviet Union. The bad feature of this conflict, though, is Sparta won it. It was like being like the Soviet Union would win a conflict with us. Well, anyway, that didn't happen. But in the case of the Peloponnesian War that I'm going to talk about next, I'll tell you right now, Sparta did win. Now, Athens started to build a wall. Sparta sent a delegation to Athens saying, hey, this will make you too powerful. Don't build the wall. Pericles said to the Spartan delegation, perhaps you're right. I tell you what, I'll come to your city of Sparta and we'll talk things over. So Pericles went to the city of Sparta, but before he left, he whispered to the people behind him, "Man, work day and night to get this wall done, and they've gotten the wall finished, send for me." So while the people of Athens were working day and night on the wall, Pericles pretended to be agreeing with the Spartans. But all of a sudden, a runner from Athens came up to Sparta, came up to Pericles and said, "Sir, the wall is finished." Pericles waved goodbye to the Spartans and said, "I'll see you later," and went right back to Athens. And the Spartans felt like they'd been tricked. It ultimately made the Spartans angry. Well, Sparta sent a delegation to try to talk things over with Athens. Athens would not agree to Sparta's terms, and the Spartans shook their fist at Athens and said, "You're going to regret this. This is going to be a sad day in the history of Athens." They were very right. The Peloponnesian War was destined to last 20 years, and it ended with Athens' walls being torn to the ground and Athens' navy being completely, the ships all wrecked and sunk. Anyway, the Peloponnesian War began with Athens being surrounded by Sparta. Athens relied on its navy. Now, the Spartan army was outside of Athens, which meant that the Athenian people living in the countryside had to come inside the city walls to protect themselves from Spartans. So what you had inside Athens was a whole bunch of people crowded together, just ripe for a plague. The first year of the war ended with indecisively. Athens had won a few battles, Sparta had won a few. And here's where your book has, at the beginning of the chapter, a vignette that Pericles spoke. During the winter, they had a funeral for the dead, and Pericles used that occasion to tell the Athenian people how wonderful democracy was and how great democracy was, and how that we, our democratic state of Athens, are going to defeat these evil Spartans because they are not as free as we are. The freedom is the best. All this bragging up real highly. But inside the city of Athens, a plague broke out. And in those days, they had no defense against the plague. The Spartan army was outside. The Spartan army was not affected by the plague. People inside the walls were. The plague wound up carrying off a lot of Athenians, including eventually Pericles himself. Now, I want to digress a little bit to give you a little bit of a glimpse into the personal life of Pericles. In his younger days, Pericles had had one illegitimate son, and of course the Athenians believed illegitimate children do not inherit. Well, when the plague broke out, a lot of persons, rich and poor alike, but even the rich, were losing their sons. And they would bring up before the Council of 500, let's make an exception that if a man has no legitimate sons, let him pass his inheritance on to the illegitimate ones. Pericles staunchly stood and said, no way, illegitimate sons will never inherit. The Council of 500 voted it down. This happened more than once. Well, Pericles, his oldest son, died. Pericles, of course, attended the funeral and never shed a tear. And I thought, this is not the way to live. But he believed a leader of his stature should not cry, should not show any emotion. He showed no emotion. His oldest son dead. Short time later, his younger son took the plague and he died. Pericles tried to maintain what you might call a stiff upper lip, but all of a sudden he lost control and broke down and sobbed uncontrollably. Then he, Pericles, went before the council and asked if his own illegitimate child could inherit the estate because he had no legitimate sons left. The council turned him down. Shortly afterward, Pericles himself died. The estate went to a distant relative. Again, just a little glimpse into the personal life of what went on in one man. All right. The war was, in the meantime, was really going badly for the Athenians. And finally, the Athenians called for a truce. The truce was signed greatly in Sparta's favor, but Athens could not accept the fact it had lost. So again, that this is the Athenian Council of 500 voted to send an expedition to Sicily, which was contrary to the terms of the truce. The expedition to Sicily was a terrible disaster. Every Athenian soldier, from the generals to the privates who went, was either killed or sold into slavery. None of them returned home. Sicily won handily. Well, finally, Sparta got tired of Athens breaking the truce, so Sparta invaded again, and this time with Athens terribly weakened. Athens was burnt to the ground again. Well, that could be burnt was burnt. Athens' navy was completely disbanded, and Athens' walls that Sparta had been against were torn down. All right, Sparta was thinking, okay, we're going to unite the Greeks. We're going to unite them, and they're going to be under our control. But Sparta had a big weakness. Their army would not change. I mean, if you can imagine, if Sparta were still around, if they tried to fight with the same manuals that they used back then and fight with their swords and spears. Well, I mean, let's face it, the military changes, warfare changes, weapons change, formations change. Sparta didn't change. Sparta went to war with Thebes. Sparta thought to have an easy time of it against Thebes. There was a problem. The Theban general figured out, now, hey, if I can break their flank, I can defeat them. So I know what I'll do. Instead of sending 5 or 6 men deep on the flank, I'm going to make my attack on the flank 50 men deep. Sparta only had 6 men, line of 6 men deep on their flank. The Theban general hit them with 50 men deep. That is 50 men in 50 different lines on the flank, and they destroyed the Spartan flank. Then once they were around the side of the Spartan, I mean, keep in mind, every Spartan soldier was disciplined, was looking straight in front of him, fighting the man in front of him. But the general was aware that the flank had broken down, and these men were going to be hit from behind. So the Spartan general ordered a retreat. Now his intent was just simply to tell his men to pull back, and he'd reform them and go into the battle again. Hey, nothing wrong with that. That sounds straight. But pull them in back, except for one thing. When he told his men to retreat, half of them said, "Retreat, we are Spartans, we don't retreat." Yeah. And the half that didn't retreat got annihilated, because the half of them did retreat. So some of them obeyed their commander and retreated. Some of them stayed in, but they no longer had a line because half the men had pulled back like they were told to do. They all should have retreated, I mean, just simply. But again, this was a weakness. They were so well trained to stay and fight. But all the Spartan general would do was just simply regroup them, reorganize them, and send them back into the fight. But he didn't have time to explain it to his men. Anyway, the Thebans won the battle. The Spartans thought about fighting another day, even though they were pretty well annihilated. Well, anyway, Sparta went home in defeat. What happened was when the Spartans were about to fight, a negotiator came in, and he negotiated peace between Sparta and Thebes. It was greatly in the Thebans' favor. When the Spartans returned home, they found that they're helots. That is, they're slaves who lived in the city of Messenia, who claimed to be descendants of Hercules. The helots had joined with another city-state, and they were in full rebellion, and they greatly outnumbered the Spartans. The Spartan men, keep in mind, were sore, bruised, banged up, some of them broken up. And then there was the whole Helot host, as well as the host of this other city-state that had joined. The Spartans decided to negotiate. So they negotiated a peace that was greatly in favor of the Helots. Well, a lot of the Helot people who had fled the city of Messenia came back after this, so the Helot population got bigger and bigger and bigger. If that weren't enough, an earthquake hit and killed 25,000 Spartans and hardly hit the Helots. And if that weren't enough to destroy the Spartans made a law that every couple had to pay for their child's education in the Spartan military camp. So Spartan couples started practicing birth control because they had no way to make a living. All they knew was soldiering. So they had no way to earn money, and they couldn't pay for their children's education. So basically the Spartan population kept going down, and eventually the Spartans realized they did not have the people enough to enough to take over and run the whole land of Greece. So for the next 70 years or so, the people of Greece fought one war after another to try to unite themselves, and they couldn't. Finally, after 70 years of constant fighting, in stepped Philip of Macedon. Now, Macedonia was, well, it's located to the northeast of Greece. Well, like here's Greece, and here's Macedonia. That's where it was. And the Macedonians were related to the Greeks. They spoke the same